The hallway smelled of bleach and boiled carrots, like every morning at the facility. I'd grown used to the way the vinyl floors echoed under the wheels of meal carts, the occasional cough from the television room, the staff's shoes squeaking as they passed. What I hadn't gotten used to, even after 7 months, was the way everyone looked at me here, as if I'd already disappeared. My room was at the end of the west wing, far enough from the common areas that I rarely heard much after 8 p.m., except for the faint buzz of fluorescent lights that never quite turned off. There were 2 chairs, one by the window, where I spent most mornings staring out at a parking lot lined with dying pines, and another in the corner beside the small dresser where my son's wife had shoved a few of my folded sweaters before disappearing. They told me I was lucky to have a private room, but luck had little to do with it. It was guilt Ebner hadn't come to visit in 3 weeks. I wasn't counting, not officially, just noting, the way one notes a cold draft or the click of a clock. Willow, my daughter, called twice, once on Easter. Once by mistake, I think. Both of them had lives full of calendars and clients, smiling spouses, school events. I had my memories. And the medication tray. Breakfast that morning had been lukewarm oatmeal and apple juice. I took the tray back untouched. I didn't eat much these days. Food didn't taste like anything when you hadn't cooked it yourself. The nurses said I was still sharp, as if clarity were a temporary blessing that could be revoked. They'd pat my shoulder and tell me I was doing so well, before handing me a paper cup of pills and a little plastic water glass like I was a child. There was a routine, sure. Morning checks. Physical therapy on Tuesdays, bingo. If I felt like it, which I never did. The others here didn't talk much. Some couldn't, others wouldn't. I kept to myself. You learn to when you're somewhere no one is visiting you. The window in my room faced west, and around mid-morning the sun would hit the edge of the glass and scatter little diamonds across the wall. I started measuring my days by that slant of light. That morning, the sun had already moved past the frame when I realized I was still holding Pearl's photograph. She was smiling in it, wearing that green sweater I always liked, the one she refused to throw out even after it got a hole in the cuff. Her hand was in mine. Her eyes, too. That picture had sat on our nightstand for decades. Now it sat on this state-issued sill, watching me shrink. I missed her laugh. I missed her quiet, the warmth she carried like a second skin. In this place, even the silence was sterile. They said the facility was named Sunny Meadows, which sounded like something from a brochure for a failed timeshare. It was neither sunny nor a meadow, but it was where they put me. I didn't remember agreeing. I remembered Ebner bringing me for a weekend trial stay and then never picking me back up. The rest had been paperwork, handshakes, a brief explanation about the house being too much, and the neighborhood changing. I was supposed to be grateful. They left me a suitcase and a phone that didn't ring. They brought my slippers, but not my radio. They forgot the sweater Pearl knit. And just like that, a life unraveled into a room with beeping monitors and a wipe-clean recliner. I used to think I'd die in that house. I just didn't think they'd throw me out first. That thought lingered like stale breath in the cold corners of my mind, refusing to lift. I'd built that house with my own hands back when Pearl was still humming around the kitchen, back when the kids were small enough to fall asleep in the back seat before we pulled into the driveway. It wasn't just a roof and walls, but it was our life, layered into every floorboard, every loose hinge, every stubborn window that needed a nudge before it would open. It started slowly, the shift. Pearl died on a Monday. Not that it matters, but I always remember the way the coffee tasted wrong that morning, like the pot had forgotten how to be kind. After that, time loosened. Days folded into one another, and the house got quieter. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that made the air feel thick. At first, the kids checked in. Willow came by weekly, always bringing something she'd baked, trying to make her visits feel normal. Ebner, less so. He preferred calls, short, efficient, ending with phrases like, "Take care of yourself, Dad." I didn't ask for anything, didn't need to. The pension covered groceries. The neighbors still waved, and Pearl's hydrangeas bloomed like they hadn't noticed she was gone. But then things started to change in ways too small to protest. It began with Ebner, suggesting I sell the old Buick. Too much upkeep, he said. Then it was the gutters, then the back porch. You could get a nice little condo, he said once, while sipping store-bought iced tea on my front step like he'd earned the view. I laughed it off. I wasn't ready to leave the place. I still heard Pearl's voice echoing in. Then came the incident with the stairs. I'd slipped on the third to last step. Nothing dramatic. A bruised hip, a sore wrist. But that was all they needed. Willow's face twisted with concern, but it was Ebner who saw opportunity. "You need help, Dad," he said. "I slipped," I replied. "People slip. It's not a crime." He nodded, said nothing for a long moment. Then, as if reading from a script, he added, "It's not safe anymore." I didn't know then how long they'd been planning it. A few weeks later, they showed up together. A Sunday. I should have known. No one visits out of the blue without reason. They brought brochures. Willow had them tucked into a neat folder, color-coded. I remember one had a photo of a man smiling beside a garden, holding a rake. "Independent living with dignity," the caption read. I already live with dignity, I told her. Ebner didn't wait for debate. He talked about resources, emergency buttons, peace of mind. I stood there in my own living room like a guest at my own wake. They didn't ask. They told. A temporary stay at Sunny Meadows. Just until the winter passed, just to see if I liked it. The house would be fine, they said. They'd keep an eye on it. I didn't pack the boxes. They did. I watched Pearl's framed needlework. Home is where the heart rests. Get placed face down in a crate like it had said too much. They left my garden. They left the radio. The next time I saw the house, weeks later, the curtains had changed. Someone else's choice, not mine. And when I asked Willow if she'd watered the hydrangeas, she smiled politely and said, "Dad, it's just a house." But it wasn't. It never was. And I think that's when something inside me started to shift. Not with rage, not with grief, with something quieter, colder. I'd built something they believed they could quietly dismantle. They mistook my stillness for surrender. I hadn't yet decided what I was going to do, but something started that morning when I picked up the phone and heard Ebner's voice on the other end. Smoother than usual, like he'd rehearsed. "Dad, it's Ebner," he said, as if I might have forgotten my own son's voice. He was calling to invite me to his birthday dinner, or rather, Ernestina was insisting, though I knew better. She'd never insisted on anything except that I stop using their driveway when I visited. Still, I agreed. I hadn't seen the grandchildren in months. What struck me wasn't the invitation. It was the way Ebner spoke. Too quick, too polished. Like he needed this more than he let on, and I wondered, what changed? Later that day, while organizing a drawer the staff had mostly ignored, I found a manila envelope tucked beneath an old crossword book. It had my name scrawled in thick, urgent letters. No return address. Inside was a photocopy of a deed, my deed, Elm Street, my name. I stared at it for a long time, blinking hard to be sure. The original had been in my file cabinet and the locked one in my study. I flipped through the rest. A second paper caught my breath, a printout of an email between Ebner and someone named Karen, a real estate agent. Seller is motivated but wants discretion until move finalized. No listing yet. Private buyer preferred. Seller, not owner. The date was 3 weeks earlier, days after they'd brought me here. I set the papers down slowly, as if they might detonate. It wasn't just a push toward safety anymore. It was a transaction. I didn't know who had sent the envelope. There was no note, no hint. Just the quiet clarity of betrayal printed in 12-point font. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the drop ceiling, listening to the hum of the vending machine in the hallway. They'd always thought I was too sentimental to fight. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was. But not anymore. In the morning I asked for my brown corduroy jacket, the one with the deep inner pocket. I called the front desk and asked about town shuttle times. You have an appointment? The girl asked. Family dinner, I replied, but I might make a stop first. She didn't question it. At noon, I slipped the envelope into my jacket and rode the shuttle to Castleton's main square. My legs ached, but I walked the 2 blocks to Thornton and Avery, attorneys at law. The bell above the door still jingled like it had when Pearl and I drew up our will. Thornton wasn't there, retired apparently, but his daughter, Mary Ann, now ran the place. She looked just like her father, minus the bow ties. I need some clarification, I told her, sliding the papers across the desk. She read quietly, only her eyes moving. After a while, she leaned back and sighed. Mr. Lamston, she said gently, you're still the legal owner. The house cannot be sold without your signature, even with power of attorney, which I don't see here. They'd need explicit consent for a property transfer. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. So if I never give consent, they can't touch it, she finished for me. For the first time in weeks, I exhaled fully. I left with a fresh copy of the deed and a quiet resolve, nesting somewhere deep behind my ribs. I still didn't know who had sent the envelope, but someone wanted me to see what they were planning, and that was enough. I was going to Ebner's birthday, not to smile, not to celebrate, to listen, to wait. And then, when the time was right, to remind them all that I was not gone yet. I was going to Ebner's birthday, not to smile, not to celebrate, to listen, to wait. I arrived 15 minutes early, which, for Ebner, counted as an insult. He always preferred to make an entrance, but I'd made up my mind to be there before anyone else. I needed to see the house, to read the room, to measure the air before the performance began. Lydia opened the door, all teeth and spark and warmth. I didn't expect to feel tonight. Her hug nearly toppled my balance. I held her close, silently thanking the universe for preserving this one real connection in a family slowly drifting toward convenience and cruelty. Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and roast duck. Ernestina's touch. Everything neat, everything exact. Too neat, too exact. Not a single picture frame crooked, not a smudge on the glass table. The place made you nervous to breathe too heavily, as though your exhale might disturb the atmosphere. I handed Ebner the small box containing Grandpa Lamston's cufflinks. He muttered thanks, already looking past me, scanning the room for more important faces. That suited me just fine. Let him underestimate, let him float on wine and ego. Willow hugged me warmly. Her scent was unfamiliar now, expensive and floral. She looked tired, and when her eyes met mine, I saw the apology that never quite reached her lips. I squeezed her hand gently. No need to say it, not yet. I sat where I could observe the whole room, the kind of corner Pearl used to call safe ground. You see everyone, and no one sees you seeing them. The guests arrived in slow waves. Ebner's business associates. Neighbors I barely recognized, everyone laughing a little too loud, complimenting the house, the food, the children. The kind of evening where the truth is just decoration and no one asks real questions. Dinner was served with too much formality. Courses, wine pairings. Ernestina really had committed to this performance. But it was all shadow work to me. I wasn't here for the duck or the cake. I watched Ebner throughout the meal, the way he touched his glass, the way his fingers fidgeted when he thought no one was watching. He had something rehearsed. I could feel it. And when he finally stood, lifting his glass for a toast, I felt my own fingers tighten around the stem of mine. He cleared his throat. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. 43 is not a milestone, but it feels like one. Business is growing, the family is healthy, and there's so much ahead. Polite applause. Ernestina beamed. But, he continued, glancing at me, none of that's possible without strong foundations. Family, sacrifice. Another pause. A sip. Then he smiled. I'm excited to share that Lamston Print has been offered a major contract, one that requires expansion, of course. New premises, more staff, a bigger vision. He looked at me again. And with the bank's support and some help from family assets, we're in a position to make it happen. There it was. He hadn't said it outright, but I felt the weight of it land on the table like a second dessert. Willow's jaw tightened. She looked away. I set my glass down carefully. "Family assets?" I asked, my voice steady, quiet. Ebner smiled, that practiced, tight-lipped expression he wore when negotiating something he already believed he'd won. "We've been exploring some options," he said. "Sun Valley has a wonderful facility. You'd have support, community, everything you need. And the house? Well, it would be put to good use." I nodded slowly. Let the silence sit. Let him think it meant consent. What I was doing now was not agreeing. It was gathering. I would not raise my voice. I would not protest. Not here. Not now. But something had shifted. In the quiet between bites and birthday songs, I started planning. It began with a list, a quiet one, folded into the back of my notebook beneath a crossword half solved and a phone number I hadn't dialed in years. I wrote it during the early morning hours when the hallway outside my room at Sunny Meadows felt like the hush before a storm. The list wasn't long. Get the deed copied again. Talk to Marianne about trust law. Visit the house. Alone. And then, in shaky handwriting I didn't quite recognize as mine. 4. Decide what I want. That last item felt the heaviest. For so long I'd let everything swirl around me. I hadn't wanted much after Pearl died. A roof, a chair, her photograph on the sill. But now, suddenly, I did want something. Not revenge, not exactly. Just clarity. Just the right to name what was mine before it became someone else's plan. I made the first calls quietly. Marianne agreed to meet again, no questions asked. She was sharp and kind, and more importantly, she knew when to listen. We talked through options, a revocable trust, a life estate, things I'd only half understood when Pearl and I first drafted our wills. This time, I asked questions. This time, I made sure nothing could move without me. I didn't tell the kids. Not yet. The second visit was harder. It took 3 calls and 1 insistence to the staff before they approved my outing. Family supervision recommended, they said. I smiled. Told them I had someone in mind. I called Gordon. He lived 2 streets over from the old place and had a limp that made walking hard, but he still mowed his own lawn and read the paper every day. He picked me up in a car that rattled with dignity and time, didn't ask questions, just handed me a thermos of real coffee and said, "You drive this one, for old time's sake." The house looked the same from the road, too much the same. The grass was trimmed, the shutters painted. But the curtains were different, beige and synthetic, no sign of Pearl's lace. My hands trembled a little as I unlocked the front door. I expected to feel something collapse inside me, but instead, I felt still. Like stepping into a memory you know you're strong enough to walk through now. I walked the rooms slowly. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon, but none of the jars on the shelves were mine. The wooden spoon Pearl had kept near the stove was gone. The magnet collection had vanished, but the floors creaked the same. The sun still spilled across the living room floor in a long golden stripe by late afternoon. Upstairs I sat in what used to be our room. The closet had been emptied, but the hook where her nightgown once hung was still loose. I touched it gently. This was still my home, no matter how they tried to reshape it. When I came back downstairs, Gordon was waiting by the fireplace. "Still got your hands in this place," he said softly. "I think I always will." He drove me back in silence. Before I got out, I handed him an envelope. "You didn't ask why," I said. "Didn't need to," he replied, "but I'm glad you did." That night I scratched one more thing into my list. Tell them no. It wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be dramatic, but it would be final. They'd made their move. Now it was my turn. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving Sunny Meadows that morning. I dressed slowly, carefully, pressed slacks, the clean blue shirt with the collar still stiff from starch. I tied my shoes with fingers that had once carved cabinets, laid bricks, opened jam jars for 2 children who now barely knew how to look me in the eye. I left the facility with a bag no heavier than a lunchbox. The envelope stayed zipped inside my jacket. I didn't need more than that. I wasn't going far, just to remind someone who I still was. The meeting was at the bank. Willow had arranged it under the illusion that I'd come to sign some clarifications about my financial status. I let her believe that. I didn't correct her when she said it would be quick. The room was glass-walled, corporate, cold, the kind of place that made you feel smaller than you were, like they'd designed the chairs to make your back ache faster. Ebner was already there. He was pacing, holding a tablet, looking impatient. He didn't notice when I walked in, not until I pulled the deed from my jacket and placed it flat on the polished table. "You recognize this?" I asked. His head snapped toward me. Then he smiled. That same brittle thing he used when someone caught him bending a rule as a boy. "Dad, let's sit down," he said. "I'm standing," I replied. The banker, a pale man in a tie, 2 sizes too wide, looked like he wanted to melt into the carpet. "I'm here because your sister believes this is about estate planning," I continued. "But it's not. It's about ownership. It's about intent. It's about the way you lied to my face." "Dad," Ebner said again, softer now, but with warning behind the syllables. I didn't lower my voice. "You contacted a realtor. You referred to my house as a family asset. You made decisions about my future without 1 ounce of permission. And you know what? I'd believe you did it for my safety, if you hadn't already changed the curtains." His lips parted, but he had no words. I turned to the banker. "Mr. Allen, my name is Raymond Lamston. I own the property on Elm Street. I have no intention of selling it. No power of attorney has been granted. No consent given. Is that clear?" The man nodded, his hands stiff on the keyboard. Crystal. I sat then, slowly, deliberately. My body ached, but my mind felt sharper than it had in months. Willow arrived 10 minutes later. She froze in the doorway, sensing the tension. "Dad, I'm not signing anything today," I said. "In fact, I'm modifying the trust with my lawyer." "Independently?" She blinked. "Why?" "Because I still get to decide," I said, "and because no one else will ever again use the words, 'just a house around me,' without knowing what it cost." Ebner finally spoke. "So that's it? You're just going to humiliate us in a bank?" "No, son," I said, folding the papers back into my jacket. "This isn't humiliation. It's clarity." I walked out before anyone else stood. Outside the wind was dry and biting, but it tasted like something close to freedom. Back at Sunny Meadows, I passed the front desk without stopping. In my room, I sat by the window and watched a squirrel dance along the gutter outside. For the first time in a long while, I felt the ground underneath me. Not just memory, not just habit. Something solid, something mine. They thought I was fragile, but I had just reminded them I was still the root. I expected silence after the confrontation at the bank, a cold front passing through the family tree. But what came instead was something stranger, attention. Willow began calling, once a week at first, then twice, her voice cautious, like she was stepping across glass to reach me. She didn't mention Ebner. She didn't apologize. But her questions changed. "Are you warm enough? Do you want me to bring your old radio? What do you miss most about the house?" She'd always been better at grief than conflict. But Ebner, he waited. I could feel him coiling behind the silence, plotting how to spin the narrative, how to wrestle back control with a smile and a clause. The invitation came on a Thursday, tucked into an envelope with no return address, delivered by courier like it was something sacred. "A family meeting," it read, "Saturday at 3 Ernestina's garden." I laughed when I read it, not from humor, but disbelief. They thought their backyard, with its trellised roses and imported gravel paths, was neutral ground. I went anyway. Not because I owed them, not because I hoped for peace, but because I needed to hear it, whatever they thought they still had to say. When I arrived, the table was already set, lemonade, cloth napkins, a vase of tulips that looked too pristine to be real. Ernestina welcomed me with a smile so brittle I feared it might shatter mid-sentence. Ebner didn't stand. Willow looked away when our eyes met. I sat. No one spoke for a moment. Then Ebner leaned forward, arms on the table, rehearsed calm, stitched into every syllable. "Dad, I think we got off on the wrong foot." I waited. "We were trying to help," he said. "Things move fast. There was an opportunity. You lied," I interrupted. My voice didn't rise, but it cut through the lemon-scented air like winter. "You orchestrated a sale behind my back. You called my home an asset. You looked me in the eye and sold my history like a weekend timeshare." Willow flinched. Ernestina pursed her lips. Ebner took a breath. "We didn't mean to hurt you." "No," I said. "You meant to erase me. You wanted the shell, but not the soul. You wanted the equity, not the echo." His eyes narrowed, the softness finally shedding. "You're being dramatic." "I'm being clear." There was a silence so deep I could hear the wind chimes from the neighbor's yard. Then Willow spoke, quiet and cracked. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." I turned to her. "And yet, here we are." She nodded slowly, the shine behind her eyes finally breaking. "I let it happen. I didn't agree, but I didn't stop him either." I studied her face, older now, drawn thin by time and decisions and regret. "You knew what that house meant?" I said. "I thought I did," she whispered. "I thought we had more time." Ebner stood then, pushing back his chair hard enough to rattle the table. "This is pointless. If you want to rot in that place, fine. But don't act like we didn't try." I stayed seated. "You didn't try. You took." He left without another word. The wind picked up, scattering a napkin across the lawn. Ernestina chased it like it mattered. Willow didn't move. I looked at her one last time. "You never saw me," I said softly, "but I see myself now." And with that, I rose and walked through their garden without looking back. I didn't return to Sunny Meadows that night. I had Gordon drop me at the inn by the old train station, the one with the crooked porch and the smell of tobacco woven into its curtains. The receptionist didn't ask questions when I paid in cash. She handed me a brass key and called me Mr. Lamston, like it meant something again. The room was small but clean. A bed, a lamp, a window facing a maple tree older than the town. I stood for a long time just listening to the creak of the wood floor beneath my feet. It sounded like presence, like decision. That first night, I didn't unpack. I lay on the bed with my shoes still on, jacket draped across my chest like armor. I slept harder than I had in months. By morning, the air had shifted. The sun poured through the lace curtain in streaks of gold and dust, and for a moment I could hear Pearl humming somewhere between the light and the wood grain. I sat up, slow and stiff but clear-headed. I reached for my notebook, crossed out the last item. Leave. It was time to begin again. I found an apartment listing in the window of Donnelly's Hardware, posted with thumbtacks and hope. Efficiency unit, it read. Back porch, small garden. No pets, no nonsense. It was behind a brick duplex near the library, a space probably meant for students or widowers like me. The landlord was named Marnie, a woman in her late 60s with blunt gray hair and a direct way of speaking. "I don't care how old you are," she said, "but you clean up after yourself and pay on time. That's the rule." "Fair enough," I replied. The place had a working stove and a rusted clawfoot tub. The floor sloped slightly near the back door, but the windows opened without a fight. There was a strip of earth behind the fence, enough for tomatoes and marigolds. I signed the lease that afternoon. When I walked into the unit with the key for the first time, I didn't feel like a guest. I felt something settle, not a return to the past, not a longing for what had been, just a place that didn't ask me to apologize for staying alive. The following days passed slowly, but without dread. I made my own coffee. I bought curtains. I went to the corner diner and ordered pancakes with real butter. No one asked if I needed help. No one offered brochures. Freedom didn't come like a trumpet blast. It came in the quiet sound of a door locking from the inside, in the weight of a grocery bag you carry yourself, In the scratch of a pen writing your name on a mailbox, I wrote to Marianne to finalize the trust changes. I sent Willow a short letter, not bitter, not cold, just honest. I didn't mention Ebner. Some things don't require updates. In the evenings, I sat on the back step with a cup of tea, watching the sun dissolve behind the rooftops. Sometimes a neighborhood cat crept by, blinking slowly like it approved. The silence no longer felt like a sentence. It felt earned. The life they had tried to write for me, boxed and padded and quieted, was over. This one was mine. The door creaked softly in the wind that night, and I let it. I wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. The silence in the new apartment wasn't loneliness. It was mine. There was a morning when I laughed out loud, just once, sharp and sudden, because I'd burned my toast. Not because it was ruined, but because I had forgotten how good it felt to ruin something of my own. I scraped it, buttered it anyway, and ate it on the back steps with jam and no apology. The days had a rhythm now. Not the tight, clinical pace of Sunny Meadows, nor the stiff choreography of my children's expectations. This rhythm was quieter, looser. I woke when the light shifted. I walked to the corner for a paper, even if I didn't always read it. I started keeping a little notepad in my breast pocket again. The same habit I had when Pearl and I were first married, jotting down thoughts or lines or grocery items that came like whispers. Marnie knocked on my door on the third Wednesday of the month. She had a box of mismatched mugs and a stack of envelopes. "These are yours," she said, "forwarded from the facility, and I figured you could use something besides that chipped cup you've been nursing." I thanked her and let her in. She sat for exactly 5 minutes, complimented my porch lilies, and then left with a nod that felt like a handshake. Inside the stack of mail was a pale yellow envelope, no return address. My name in ink that wavered slightly. I recognized the hand. It was from Lydia. She'd drawn a little flower in the corner the same way Pearl used to mark recipe cards. "Grandpa," it read, "I hope you're somewhere you like. Mom doesn't know I'm writing, but I wanted to say I miss you. It feels weird not seeing you on Sundays. Dad doesn't talk about it. He just gets quieter. I told him he was wrong. He didn't like that, but I meant it. I think you did something brave. Love, Lydia." I held the letter for a long time. That night I made a second cup of tea and placed it beside the one I drank. The gesture was absurd, but it made me feel like I was being visited. Not by someone living, but by the kind of memory that keeps you warm. The next morning I found a pair of gloves on my porch, knit, navy blue, small hands. No note. Lydia had been by. I didn't chase her down. I didn't call. Some gestures don't need answers right away. Instead, I started fixing up the garden strip behind the fence. It was stubborn soil, dry, stony, neglected. But there was promise in it. I planted cherry tomatoes, a few basil starts, and a line of snapdragons that Pearl once said looked like gossiping old women. The work tired me, but the ache in my bones wasn't unwelcome. It was the kind of exhaustion that came with purpose. One afternoon, while resting on the steps, a boy from the complex next door wandered over. He was no older than 9, dragging a broken kite by its tail. He stared at the tomatoes. "You live here now?" I nodded. "Looks like it." He kicked a loose stone. "The old guy before you died." "I heard." He looked up. "You gonna die too?" I smiled. "Not today." He came by twice more that week, sat on the step, said little, but he left the kite. I repaired it. Took 3 tries, a few Band-Aids, and some choice words. When I handed it back, he said, "Thanks, Mr. Ray." It was the first time anyone had called me that in a long while. That night, I opened the windows wide and let the spring air in. The apartment no longer echoed. It sounded lived in. And I realized I'd smiled without meaning to. It happened again the next weekend. This time it was Lydia, standing shyly near the garden gate with a bag of sugar cookies and a hesitant grin. "I made these in home ec," she said, as though it explained everything. I invited her to sit. She didn't need asking twice. She flopped onto the porch step beside me, her legs crossed, her sneakers scuffed from a world I no longer moved through. We didn't talk much at first, just watched the bees flirt with the basil and listen to the neighbor's dog bark at nothing in particular. Eventually, she spoke. "Dad's still mad," she said. I didn't answer right away. She pulled her knees tighter. "He says you abandoned the family, that you're being selfish." I looked at her. "And what do you think?" She shrugged. "I think they're scared. Because you stopped needing them, and because you said no." That hit deeper than I let show. I reached for a cookie, took a bite. "These are pretty good." "They're dry." "Still," I said, brushing crumbs from my lap, "they taste like effort." She smiled, small and sideways, then pulled something from her bag, a Polaroid, faintly smudged. It was us. Taken years ago at the fall fair. Pearl had snapped it. I was holding Lydia on my shoulders, her hands buried in cotton candy, my eyes squinting against the light. "I keep this on my mirror," she said, handing it to me. "Thought you might want it for now." I traced the edge with my thumb. "You remember that day?" "Only because Mom always complained you fed me too much sugar." We both laughed, soft, unguarded. She stayed longer than expected. We talked about school, her theater class, the teacher who wore sneakers with suits. As the sun dipped behind the fence, she asked, "Do you miss them?" I didn't rush the answer. "I miss what I thought we had," I said, "but not what it became." She nodded like she understood, and maybe she did, more than the adults did at least. Before leaving, she leaned over and hugged me, tighter than she ever had before. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. Those 4 words nearly knocked me flat. After she left, I sat for a long time with the photo in my hand. There was a line across the top where it had been creased, but our faces were untouched. The next morning, I pinned it above the sink with a magnet shaped like a pear, a flea market find from earlier in the week. I stood back and looked at it, that little square of memory anchoring the present. Later I called Marianne, not about the trust, not about paperwork, just to ask how she was. We spoke for 20 minutes about nothing. It felt like friendship. Then I made a list for the day. Buy more soil, try a new recipe, write a letter to Pearl. That last one stayed with me the longest. I sat down at the small kitchen table that afternoon and began slowly. "Pearl, you wouldn't believe the garden this year. It wasn't a letter for answers. It wasn't even one I planned to send into the air like in the movies. It was just a conversation long overdue. As I signed my name, I felt something soften in my chest. Not grief, not guilt. Something closer to forgiveness, not for them, for me. It didn't take long for the calm to ripple. They always sensed when I was too still, like silence made them nervous. The letter came in a thick envelope, embossed, the kind of stationery you use when pretending civility. No return address again, but I knew the hand. Not Lydia's this time, Ernestina's. Inside were 4 sheets folded with surgical precision. The first was a typed letter. The tone was clipped, almost cheerful. "We'd like to revisit the conversation regarding the Elm Street property. There are new options available that could benefit everyone." The second was a summary of care facilities, more glossy brochures, more phrases like state-of-the-art and senior enrichment. The third was a financial projection, a spreadsheet printed in grayscale showing what liquidating the property could provide over the next decade. And the fourth, this was the one that caught my breath, was a form, a blank transfer of ownership. No signature yet, just space. I stared at it for a long time, my thumb pressed to the edge of the paper until it left a crease. There it was, their final move. No call, no visit, no apology, just numbers and assumptions and the blank space where my consent was expected to go. They still didn't understand. I folded the pages back carefully, slid them into the envelope, and set it on the windowsill. It stayed there 3 days. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I wanted them to know I took my time deciding. On the 4th day, I took the form and wrote 2 words across the signature line in black ink. Not no, not a refusal, not yours. I mailed it back without a return note, no commentary. Just my handwriting and their question, answered. Later that week, Marnie knocked on the door again, holding a covered dish. "You've got a visitor," she said. "Didn't know if you'd want warning." I stepped onto the porch and saw Willow by the fence, arms crossed, expression unreadable. She didn't wave. "Mind if I come in?" she asked. I didn't answer, just stepped aside. She sat on the same step Lydia had chosen weeks before, but she didn't bring cookies, just herself. "I told them not to send the letter," she said after a pause, "yet here you are. I came to say I understand now, not everything, but enough." I looked at her, older now than Pearl was when we first bought the house, the lines around her eyes no longer smoothed when she smiled. "They think you're being stubborn," she went on. "I think you're being clear." "Good," I said. I was worried the message wasn't loud enough. A faint smile, quickly gone. She reached into her bag and handed me a small box. "It's Pearl's locket. I found it in one of the moving bins. Thought it was lost." I opened it. The photo inside was faded, but still there. Pearl on the left, me on the right. Taken before either of us had children, when we still thought we had forever to figure things out. "Thank you," I said. She nodded. "I'm not here to fix anything. Just wanted to return something that was yours." We didn't talk after that. She left quietly, but something in the air shifted again. Not trust, but the ghost of it. They had made their final play, and I had answered, without raising my voice. I was done protecting their comfort. Now I would protect my peace. I called Marianne the next morning and told her to file everything, finalize the changes, lock 'em in. She didn't ask why this time. She simply said, "Understood," and gave me a date when the documents would be irrevocable. A month. That's how long it would take to sever the last remaining threads. 30 days. I counted them out in my notebook, crossing off one square at a time like a prisoner inching toward parole. But it didn't feel like a sentence. It felt like permission. The garden bloomed faster than expected. The snapdragons opened like gossip in full swing, and the tomatoes began to ripen, sun-warmed and defiant. Marnie started bringing me cuttings from her own patch, mint-out chives. Even a stubborn hydrangea sprout that didn't know whether it wanted to live. "You've got a good touch," she said one day, handing me a trowel. "I used to think I'd lost it," I replied. "Hands remember," she said, "even when the heart forgets." On the 15th day, Ebner showed up. I saw his car from the window, new, black, too shiny for the gravel lot. He stood there for a long time, engine off, just staring at the apartment door like it owed him something. When he finally knocked, it wasn't loud, just 3 slow taps. I didn't invite him in. I stepped out instead, closed the door behind me. He didn't waste time. "You're really doing this?" "I already did." "You're leaving us out entirely." "No," I said. "You did that the day you tried to move me like a piece of furniture." He shook his head, laughed bitterly. "You're not thinking long term." "That's where you're wrong," I said. "This is the first time I have." He looked around at the flower boxes, the repaired fence, the wind chimes Lydia had hung last week. "This place isn't much," he muttered. "It's enough," I replied. "It's honest." He stepped closer. "And what about when you get sick again? Who's going to help you then?" I stared at him, long enough for him to look away first. "I've made arrangements," I said, "and before you ask, no, they don't involve you." His mouth opened, then closed. "You always said you wanted what was best for the family," I said. "But what you really wanted was control. That's not fair." "No," I said, "but it's true." He didn't argue, just turned back toward the car. At the edge of the steps, he paused. "Lydia says you make your own jam now. She likes it on toast." He nodded once. Then he left. I stood there long after the sound of his engine faded, breathing in the late summer air that tasted of mint and ripening fruit. That night, I wrote one more thing in my notebook beneath the crossed-off squares. Peace isn't what they give you. It's what you keep for yourself. And I had kept it, not out of spite, but out of understanding. They had shown me what love with conditions looked like, and I had chosen something else. I would not be visited like a burden. I would not be spoken of like a problem to solve. The documents would be final in 2 more weeks. But the decision had already rooted itself. Permanent, private, mine. I started going to the library on Tuesdays. It wasn't far, 4 blocks through a neighborhood where every porch had a story and most of the windowsills had cats. The library itself was small, nestled between a barber shop and a bakery with chipped paint on the railings and a volunteer-run bulletin board near the entrance. That's where I saw it. The flyer. Community Readers Circle. Thursdays at 5. Bring a book. Bring yourself. I hesitated. It had been years since I'd read aloud to anyone but Pearl. She used to say I gave every sentence too much weight, like the words needed permission to be spoken, but I showed up anyway. The group was held in a side room with mismatched chairs and a smell of old pages and warm dust. There were only 4 others that first night. A retired teacher named Helen, a teenage boy named Marcus, who barely looked up from his novel, a woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Claudette and asked too many questions, and Walter. Walter wore suspenders and a wool cap even in July. He had a stutter that came and went like a nervous guest and a laugh that surprised him every time. We bonded over Faulkner, argued about endings, agreed on rhythm. By the 3rd Thursday, I brought a story of my own, a short piece I'd written about gardening and grief and the way tomatoes never ripen when you watch them. They listened. They clapped. Claudette even teared up. Walter stayed afterward. "You write like you're explaining the world to someone you love," he said. I nodded. "I think I am." From then on, we walked home together. He lived 2 streets down in a boarding house filled with men who didn't speak much. One evening, he asked if I wanted to see his project. "I restore radios," he said. "Not for profit. Just to hear them sing again." His room was small but full of life, wires and knobs and the smell of soldering paste. He showed me one radio with a walnut casing and a dial that glowed amber when touched. "Pearl would have loved that one," I said without thinking. He didn't press. Just turned the knob and let a Billie Holiday song crackle through the speaker. We sat quietly, not talking, not needing to. It didn't feel like romance. Not yet. But it felt like something leaning toward warmth. On the walk back, he asked if I'd ever consider performing something public. "Like what?" I asked. "Like reading that garden story on the community night stage?" I laughed. "That's for people with better shoes." "But not better stories," he said. That stuck with me. At home, I found myself humming. I baked more. Rearranged the bookshelves. Bought a second pillow for the couch. Not because I expected company on that hours, just because it made the room look less empty. Lydia noticed. She came by with a potted fern and said, "This place is starting to look lived in." "It is," I replied. "You seem happier." "I am." She touched the radio on the shelf. "Did you fix this?" "A friend did." She smiled knowingly. The garden was full now, tomatoes ready to burst, basil taller than my knee. I made jam again, but this time I labeled the jars. Ray's summer batch. Because that's what it felt like. A season I hadn't expected, but one I was grateful to name. The keys jingled in my hand with a weight that felt ceremonial. I stood on the threshold of the new place, the one I'd signed for quietly 2 months ago. A cottage tucked near the edge of town, not large, not fancy, but wholly mine. The final walk-through had been, that morning. The paint still smelled fresh. The garden bed out front was bare but ready. The porch was wide enough for 2 chairs and a small table. I'd already imagined where the morning light would hit. Walter helped me move. Not the heavy lifting, we hired 2 college kids for that, but the arranging. He had an eye for comfort, for corners, for where music should come from. We unpacked slowly, a box at a time. He placed the radio on the windowsill where the sun caught its dial just so. I hung the photo of Pearl and me above the desk, and Lydia's Polaroid went beside it, framed in wood I'd sanded myself. There was no ceremony, no ribbon to cut. Just the quiet act of putting things where they belonged. When the last box was flattened, Walter asked, "Want to sit out front?" We did. The sky was the color of rusted copper, and the air smelled of turned soil. He held his tea in both hands. I watched the wind move through the empty garden like it was writing something in cursive I hadn't yet learned to read. I never thought I'd live somewhere new again, I said. Walter nodded. I never thought I'd want to. We didn't speak for a while after that. Later, I walked the perimeter of the cottage, ran my hand along the side paneling, tapped the fence rail like a man checking his heartbeat. This place wasn't grand, but it was honest, and it didn't carry ghosts the way Elm Street had started to. In the back, there was a single peach tree, young, maybe 6 years old, leaning slightly, leaves still learning their shape. I knelt and pulled weeds from its base, my knees cracking like knuckles. "You'll do," I whispered to it. "We both will." Inside, the living room was bathed in quiet, not silence and the kind that clings to hospital rooms, but stillness, like a held breath that didn't need to be released yet. I hung curtains Pearl would have chosen, watered the fern Lydia gave me, set out the jam jars on a shelf lined with gingham. That night I made dinner from scratch. Chicken roasted with thyme, carrots pulled from Marnie's last harvest. A glass of wine I let breathe longer than I needed to. I ate slowly, gratefully. And when I finished, I lit a candle by the window, just one, and let the scent of lavender rise. I didn't cry. I didn't mourn. I stood in the doorway of the home I built for myself and breathed in the fullness of a moment. No one had orchestrated, no one had chosen it for me, no one had rewritten it. This chapter was not survival, it was return, not to a place, but to self. As I turned off the lights, I paused at the door one more time and whispered, "Thank you." I didn't need to say to whom. The house heard me, and I believed it answered back. The mornings settled into a kind of music, no alarms, no medications lined up on plastic trays, just the slow light of day slipping over the windowsills, the kettle beginning to hum, and the sound of birds testing out their scales. I started keeping a journal again, not for anyone to read, just a quiet place for the thoughts that didn't need audience. I filled pages with memories, questions, grocery lists that turned into poems. Sometimes I'd write to Pearl, sometimes I'd write as if I were still her husband, still expected home by 6, still bringing her chrysanthemums on the 3rd Thursday of the month. Other days I wrote to the man I had once been, the one who said yes too quickly, who sat politely at tables where he wasn't welcome, who smiled through silences that stung. I forgave him, line by line. The legal documents arrived on a Tuesday. Marianne called to confirm the filing. "It's done," she said, "irrevocable." I thanked her, folded the letter, and tucked it into the back of the recipe book Pearl had kept. I didn't need it in plain sight. I just needed to know it existed. Walter brought over a stack of used records that evening. We played them in no particular order. Billy, Miles, some strange Scandinavian jazz that sounded like rain falling through glass. He danced with me once, no music. Just held out his hand in the kitchen, grinning like he'd dared himself. I let him. It was not a performance, it wasn't for anyone's approval. It was 2 old men swaying slightly beside a pot of simmering stew, barefoot and brave enough to be witnessed. Lydia visited more often. She brought plants I didn't ask for and sat on the porch correcting her school essays with a red pen that ran dry halfway through. We didn't talk much about Ebner anymore. Not because it didn't matter, but because we'd both learned how to let some stories close themselves. She'd begun calling me Grandpa Ray, like she was reintroducing me to the world in her own language. I liked the way it sounded. Grounded, chosen. One Sunday, she asked if she could bring a friend over. "She wants to meet you," Lydia said. "I told her you make the best jam and listen better than any adult I know." I laughed. "Well, that's a reputation worth keeping." The friend came, a girl with green nail polish and more questions than I had answers for, but I welcomed her anyway. That porch had room, that afternoon had time. Seasons turned, leaves browned, the snapdragons folded in. The peach tree gave me 4 fruits, small, sweet, unreasonably proud. I made a pie from them, just one. I ate it slowly, with gratitude. I didn't expect anything else. And that was the piece of it. No more proving, no more pleasing. I had a home now, not just in walls or deeds, but in the echo of my own name spoken with kindness. Sometimes I'd stand at the edge of the garden and close my eyes, not searching, not missing, just being. Pearl, I hope you'd laugh at the crooked path it took to get here, but I think, maybe, you'd understand, because I do now. I lived through the fracture, and I stitched something whole from the quiet after. Tomorrow, I'll plant something new, not for legacy, not for anyone to remember me by, just because the soil is ready, and so am I.